Hey folks, Mike here again. So today we're going to talk about the third and final part of my little series about mixing the song The Elephant by Robert Hammond from start to finish. Though almost no one is watching the first two parts, but for all you hardcore fans out there that still watch my shows, thanks for tuning in. So today is all about delay, reverb, parallel processing, and of course the kind of like mastering that I do on my own to finish the song. I hope the end result is as good as it can get, at least from my skill set. By the way, I won't record myself during this tutorial right now because I found out that it's just painstaking to edit the video afterwards, having the constant like the filming as a second frame going on. It's a lot of work, so I rather concentrate on showing you what I did. So long story short, and without further ado, let's jump in. So we're back in the session here, Robert Hammond, The Elephant. Last time I was kind of like done with the basic mixing, which means basic EQ and compression over all the tracks, as well as the balance. And in this part, I'm going to show you all the effects, which means delay, reverb, any additional creative effect that I've added to come up with the final result. If you haven't seen the first two parts of the video, make sure you click on the link in the description box or somewhere in the screen right now, which I will link. So you see those kind of like yellow additional tracks that I added here every now and then. Those are the effects returns that I sent up. The first 5 are just for the vocals. The 2 you see here are for the guitars. And in the drums, I made them orange just like the drums because I always try to treat the drums as a whole. So that's the reason I used the same color here for the drums. So I think the first and the biggest decision I wanted to share with you is that I've decided during the process of mixing this song to add a second snare because I found that the Ludwig Bear Beauty, which I picked in the first place, didn't have enough crack to cut through the mix. Even though I tried several things with parallel processing and EQing, but I didn't want to overprocess it. So in the end, I went back to Superior Drummer because I still have the MIDI file, of course, for that song. And I just rendered a second snare, which was the Sonor snare. So I rendered the track for the top, the bottom microphone, the overheads, and the mono room microphone. So exactly the setup which I started with to make the sound more consistent. So first I'm going to show you how this sounds first without, and then I will bring in those 4 tracks so you'll probably hear the difference. Let's jump to the verse right now. So this is the drum track without the Sonor snare. It might sound subtle, and it is subtle on purpose. I don't want to exaggerate the snare. As I said, it's my style of mixing. I don't want the drums to be as loud as hell. Unfortunately, nowadays drums are always processed way too loud, and I get the point because when the drums sit right, the song seems to sound better. But I always try to look at the whole song and not only on the drums. So I just mixed them slightly underneath because they added a little bit more top end here. Of course, every snare drum or almost every song, the snare needs a little bit of reverb. That's what I did here. I've picked this Slate Verb Suite Classics preset. It's a preset from Chris Lord-Alge at the CL8 snare, tweaked it a little bit, made it a little bit more mono, adjusted here the EQ on the left side. It's a small room, 0.5 seconds, so it's not really a huge noticeable reverb. It's just to give it a little bit more, let's say, room in addition to the overheads and the room microphone. So let's bring this in back and forth. As always, a little goes a long way here. Finally, what I usually do as well when I still need some, let's say, overall tone, is I send just the overheads to a drum reverb channel. So no direct microphones, instead of just the snare. Because this makes sure that the whole drum set as a whole, including the cymbals and everything, is captured equally coming from the overhead. So I sent from the overheads to this drum reverb where I used Steven Slate. Steven Slate again. This time I used a plate preset with 1.2 seconds of decay, and again did some minor tweaks here and there, brought down the gain, removed a little bit of the high end and the low end to make it fit in the mix. So let me now bring in the drum verb here on the overheads. The decay time, as you probably might have heard, it's kind of like set in a way that especially the decay of the snare ends the second or the moment the kick comes back in. It doesn't have to be 100% accurately right, but this is what I try. The tempo of the song is 110 BPM, so you can calculate how many seconds you still have between the beats, but I do this by ear. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, as I said, especially when you're playing fills, you won't achieve that, but especially in those verses, which you're gonna hear, where the drums have a lot of space because there's not much going on otherwise. I think this is a cool effect. So now together in context with the song, still with some processing missing, of course. So as the synths, you just heard them, again, some reverb here. I used a dark hall preset, cranked it up to 2 seconds, cranked the width control almost to the max, so it spreads out left and right, and added some EQ here and just brought down the dry red control to 38% because I didn't want the synths to disappear in the reverb, but I thought without the reverb, so let's listen to the synth here without the reverb, I thought they're a little bit too dry. And by the way, you see this green color underneath the faders, which means I've added volume automation here. I won't show you everything, but you see it's slightly moving, which I did. What I did here was in between the verse where the singer is not singing, I've added a dB or two to bring up the synths, and the moment the singer is coming back in, you will see the faders going down again. But now hear the synths with the reverb added. Just like to create that bed of sound in the background. For the piano, as effects, I use this amazing plugin from Greg Wells. I usually don't use those Signature series plugins, which Waves has a lot from. The Greg Wells series, though, amazing. He has something for piano, for vocals, which I used in this song as well, and 2 different things for the mix bus, which I'm going to show you in a second as well. So this is just amazing what it does to the track. So let me quickly jump here to the piano. It adds some delay and some overall brightness. You just have one knob that you can control here, and I just tweaked it listening to the song. So here just the piano with and without the piano-centric plugin. And now with. It's the same idea as for the synth or for the drum bus. It's just kind of like adding a little bit of dynamics and depth and width to the sound. Otherwise, I thought the sound is too one-dimensional. For the guitars, of course, I tweaked a little bit of them furthermore afterwards to find some annoying frequencies, but I won't show you now every single detail that I did. So both the riff guitar, which starts in the beginning, so this one here, as well as the lead guitar, which is playing this one here, I both sent to the same effects channel here, which I call the Guitar Hall. I first started with the H delay plugin from Waves, which just adds a 8-note triplet delay, slap delay, feedback at about 44. So let me first show you what this means. And the return itself from this Guitar Hall is panned 40%, almost 50% to the left. So exactly the opposite of the guitars. So you get this effect that, especially for the lead guitar, that the reverb from the guitar is coming from the other side than the original signal. So that's what I created here. So first the delay with the lead guitar. Again, it's subtle, and afterwards, after the delay, I've put again Verb Suite Classics, a room with 1.5 seconds, and blend down to 33% wet, because I just wanted to delay going into that reverb. So this is how it sounds. So especially here when this, the sound is dying, like the little 1.5 point decay, it's just adding a little bit of dynamics and dimension here. And for the the rhythm guitars that play rather heavy riffs here in the choruses, so let me jump to those here. I sent them to a different reverb here, which is a room sound, 1 second of decay time, a little bit of EQ afterwards, especially those heavy riff guitars with a lot of mid-energy frequency. When you put too much reverb on them, it can sound and will sound mushy in the end, because there's a lot of low and low mid information going on into that reverb, and you have to EQ it pretty heavily, which I did here as well. So let me bring it here in the middle of the screen. So this is the EQ after the reverb, which I do quite often, that I EQ my reverb returns to tame the sound a little bit more. And you see I tried to get rid of everything below 220 here, because just like messing up and muddying up the low frequency which you need for the bass guitar and for the kick drum especially. So that's for the guitars. Didn't do anything on the bass. And then of course vocals are probably the most important instrument or part of the song that needs some reverb. So let me just solo the vocals here, and let me start with the verse. I've divided, as you saw on the last part, the verse and the chorus vocals and the background vocals as well, and treated them differently. So the verse vocal, just a quick reminder, this is how they sound.
Ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit in spite, waiting, watching.
So especially in the verses, there's not much going on, just this rhythm part from the guitars and just the drums, nothing else. So the vocals have some, let's say, time to be spread out in the stereo mix, the stereo field, and the tempo of the song, the lyrics of the song, they all brought me to the feeling that I didn't want to destroy the vocals or make them like too aggressively metalish or rock. I thought it has kind of like a dreamy character, and that's what I did. So I first started with a vocal doubler, which I used again the Greg Wells plugin series. I tried different plugins, but this was what made me happy. I didn't use any delay because I used separate delay, no reverb, just the doubler, and brought up the intensity knob, which is basically something between compression and EQ, but in a very smooth and subtle way. So this is how it sounds. First, just the doubler on its own.
As the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit in spite, waiting, watching.
Okay, so together with the vocal here.
And ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I.
It's really, doubling vocals is really a subtle effect, but it's just adding a little bit of stereo width to the left and right side, hence the words doubler, of course. I sent a copy of the doubler here into my delay plugin, just like to create the same delay effect for this doubled vocals, just for the original, the main vocal itself. But let me first show you how this sounds like without the doubler, just the verse. I used First a de-esser, because I didn't want too much S's going into the delay plugin here. So I tamed down the S's first. Then I used Steven Slate, the repeater, which is part of the Everything Access, All Access bundle, which you call it. 8-note delay with a ping pong effect, spread out the stereo. You see here are 3 different options. B is the probably widest. So I really wanted to create a wide, big delay signal here. So this is how it sounds.
Ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit in spite, waiting, watching.
And finally, a reverb, again, first de-essing the signal with the Iosis de-esser. Verb sweet classing again, whoops. A big preset. It's the FG3000 series, a Canyon preset, and the decay time from almost 2.3 seconds, because there is a lot of delay time between the phrases. So that's how I used. And finally, rolling off everything above 4.3, because I don't want the high energy to come through too much. This move, as I explained in one of the first parts, is you push the reverb itself a little bit in the background by removing the top end, and that's what I did here. So this is the lead vocal with the reverb on it.
Ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit in spite, waiting, watching.
And now together with all the 3 effects here.
Ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit in spite, waiting, watching.
And finally with the vocal doubler sent into the delay, which is subtle.
Ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit in spite, waiting, watching.
I wanted to create a soundscape or sound field here, especially in the verses. So let's hear the song or the vocals here now in context with the whole song, starting from the verse here.
Time ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit in spite, waiting, watching. In my mind, it's the only thing.
So now the chorus vocals, and you see quite a lot of, let's say, tutorials online or mixing engineers when in the choruses everything is getting bigger and louder and wider and whatever. In this case, however, I used, of course, a reverb and a delay for the chorus vocals as well. There are 2, like double vocals. I fanned them slightly 15% left and right to make them a little bit wider already by default. But when it comes to the effects, I used less effects and sent less signal into those effects in the choruses, because there's so much stuff going on in the chorus, like the heavy guitars kicking in and the lead guitar and even background vocals again, and the drums are getting louder. So I wanted the vocals to jump out and get more up front, as if they were screaming more into the face of the listener, and I don't want them to disappear in a bunch of effects. You need something like that, because otherwise it's too dry, but that's just like an explanation. So I used the same Canyon effect as a reverb, but almost a second slower or less decay time, just 2.4. And again, brought down the width a little bit because I didn't want this to be too wide and too stereo-ish. And for the delay, I used a quarter note delay, which is a little bit bigger and wider, but panned here. You see the pan knob, panned them a little bit into the middle, not too much left and right, and you see the feedback is really almost at the beginning. It's just this first 10% here, so it's really not much reverb delay here going on. It's just a touch, and you will hear this especially in the last phrase of those choruses. when the singer is ending to sing and the music is coming back in. So let me just jump here into this section and you will hear what I mean.
Is everybody fine? They don't mind.
So listen to the word mind, how it gets repeated by the repeater, because like the guitars stop playing, so there's this room coming up for especially that word, which was the idea behind it here.
Is everybody fine? They don't mind.
So as an additional effect, I won't explain, as I said, all the volume automation, which is a huge part of a mix. Don't underestimate that, but it's going to be too detailed now to go through everything. It's just like bringing up sometimes just words and phrases during the mix. So every time you see this green color, you see there was some volume automation going on. What I did though in the final part of the bridge here, I've added an effect for the lead vocal here. You see this EQ, which is the stock EQ from Reaper. I've did some drastic filter moves. So I rolled off everything below almost 500, 660, and everything above 4.1. What this will do to the sound is it will create this old radio sound, which is a cool effect, but I didn't want to have this, of course, all the time. And you can automate this. And let me just jump to the track window here. And you see this purple color here. You see, as long as this line is in the top, the EQ is bypassed. Then it gets unbypassed or enabled just for those two phrases here. And then I will automatically, the plugin will go into bypass again. So this is how this effect sounds first without automatically. And you just want you to look here at this EQ. Now it's disabled. It will be unbypassed automatically while the song is playing.
Don't you see? I'm the elephant in the room, and everyone is blind. I don't mind, I'll be sure to.
The idea here is just to add some excitement to the sound and to the song. This is something that you can do as a mixing engineer if the artist is fine with that. Sometimes you get asked by artists to add exactly that. Sometimes you add something and suggest it, and let's see what the artist is responding. In this case, obviously, as I downloaded those tracks online to just practice mixing, I can't ask anyone here, but I thought this is a cool effect for the vocals. So that's already pretty much it. I just check if I forgot something. The only thing I maybe wanted to add here is that on the hi-hat, I've automated the hi-hat as well in terms of mute. So during the chorus in the intro part where the hi-hat is playing really loud and an open hi-hat, the sound is getting a little bit harsh, and I really didn't control it with EQ, and I didn't want to kill the hi-hat, but the hi-hat is more important in the verses because it's driving this 8-note beat. So what I did, and you see this again, let me jump to the track window here. You see this every time this comes up, that means you will hear the hi-hat because it's unmuted, and during the choruses and in the beginning, the hi-hat is muted, so you will just hear the hi-hat in the overheads, but not itself, and this creates this effect. So I'm going to jump into the chorus here in the middle of the chorus, and you hear the transition to the verse when the hi-hat is noticeable again.
Step out, all the passers-by.
So finally on the master bus, you remember in the last part I had compressor from Stephen Slate and the tape machine. I deleted the compressor But most importantly, I used those two plugins from Greg Wells, which is the Tone Centric, which just adds some saturation and warmth and glue to the track. Adjusted is, of course, this one knob. It's simple, easy to use. And then the Mix Centric, which is again a combination of compression. So from this plugin, I get the compression I want for the overall drum track, for the overall song, sorry. As always, and as with the compressor I used before, I didn't want to go for 4 or 5 dB of gain reduction. It's just like tucking down the track quite a little bit. So let me bypass both of them, and I will bring them in one by one, again coming from the verse, so we hear what this sounds like.
Time ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit inspired, waiting, watching.
So yes, the track is getting a little bit louder, but that's the purpose on processing the mix bus, so don't blame me for that. But it's just like sometimes those plugins don't work at all. In this case, I had the feeling they add a little the missing piece for me. So let's jump now to the final stage, which is kind of like the mastering. I always say this with all the respect to mastering engineers. Of course, if I would release this song, I would send it to a dedicated mastering engineer. I got one question from Rob, my good friend Rob. What's the difference between mixing and mastering? I think this video is not too long to explain it. The basic idea is a mastering engineer, first and foremost for me, has a different pair of ears. So he or she will probably look at the song from a different perspective. He or she will just treat the song as a whole, because the mastering engineer usually doesn't have access to individual tracks. So the decisions a mastering engineer is taking will affect the whole song, the overall perspective of the song. He or she is changing dynamics, adding more low end or high end, or remove it if it's needed. It's just like the final touch. And mastering, this is important, it's not just about making the song as loud as possible, because this is what you can do as a mixing engineer as well. But the mastering engineer usually has tools to bring up the volume even more as you can possibly do in the mixing process, dealing with low end information, all that stuff. So you will find a ton of information online why mastering is a different art form almost when it comes to mixing. But in our home studio projects, we usually don't have access to mastering engineers. They need to get paid. So a lot of people try to do this on their own. So I already sent the whole mix now from this sub mix bus here, this white one, into this pre-master. So let me just bypass all the processing, because this now is the song, the final mix, before I start the mastering, and I will show you what I did. So here's the final mix, more or less. But it's still a very, very conservative level. You see it's peaking at -16, so the overall average loudness is usually something -20, so I mix very conservatively just to leave enough headroom for mastering process. So let me bring in Ozone 9 here, which is an amazing plugin, and let me just bypass all the 5 different things and to show you what I did here. So usually I start using this master assistant to get a starting point. When you use Ozone or anything like that, always make sure that you master and start mastering at the loudest part of the song, because mastering always, of course, means of adjusting loudness. If you adjust the loudness on the quietest part, you will probably run into clipping when the song is then getting louder. So for me, it was the third chorus and the outro where the song, and you see this in the wave file here above, where the song is probably at its loudest. So that's what I started with, the master assistant from Ozone, which is neat, but for me always just a starting point. The master assistant is adding usually this equalizer 1, then this dynamic EQ, which just takes control of bringing down some peaks in certain areas of the frequency range to get the maximizer, which makes the song actually louder, react the best way possible. So I will warn you before I bring the maximizer in, because of course the volume will jump dramatically here. But let's start with the equalizer. You see, it's just really in mastering, it's 0.7 dB here, it's 0.5 dB here. 0.4, and again 0.6. So really, really subtle moves I think when I started the Master Assistant, he just added the top and high end, and I did those two moves here where I felt I needed to boost a little bit of 300 area, which I removed quite a lot on the tracks, and brought down this area at 2.8, almost 3 kilohertz, because that's like where all the vocals are fighting with the snare drum and the guitars and all that stuff. So that's what I did here. Afterwards, low end focus means you can concentrate just on the area in the low end. And I used the punchy function, not the smooth, 20%, and brought down. So I added kind of like a transient design. I added some punch, but removed or brought down the volume a little bit. So let me just start bringing in those two things here so you can hear what I mean. And by the way, I enabled the gain match, so you won't be surprised by too much gain when I bring this in here.
Time ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit inspired, waiting.
Next thing I did is the imager. I created 4 bands here in the frequency range. What I often do is I bring down the stereo width of the low end quite a bit, not 100%, to make it literally, you make it mono. So you want the low end to really come in the middle speakers and not on the side. The second band here, again, just bring a bit, and with the upper mid range and high information, I spread it down, spread it left and right even more. So I think this change is noticeable as well. So let's have a listen.
Time ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit inspired.
And finally, the maximizer. So please be aware, guys, if you're listening on headphones or speakers, now the volume will jump a little bit. What the maximizer is doing, bringing the threshold down, I set the peak level at -13 LUFS, which is usually the level of Spotify and YouTube, something like that, between -13 and -14. And added a little bit of transient and the emphasis of the transient by 25%. So here's the maximizer.
Ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I sit inspired, waiting, watching.
So that's pretty much it, guys. Finally, what I can do, I open here my Magic AB. Version A is now the mastered, kind of like mastered version, and version B, and as you see, I added or adjusted the volume between, because of course the rough mix, and B, you hear the rough mix where we all started, even without the samples, by the way. It's just like really the raw recording I got. And then A is my final master, so I jump back and forth, so you will hear what I mean.
Ticks by as the sun illuminates the hills, and I don't you see the elephant in the room? Is everybody blind?
So guys, that was it. I hope you liked the song. Of course, I will play now the song one time, start to finish. It's almost 5 minutes. Leave comments in the comment section below if you like the song, if you have critiques or suggestions what could have been done better, if you have questions about any of the steps I did so far. For the few of you just watching the whole series, thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate that. I probably won't do this in the future that much often, but again, thanks for watching the whole series, man. And here's the final mixed and mastered song by me, The Elephant by Robert Hammond. Have fun.
watching. In my mind, it's the only thing that breaks these ties that bind me completely. Say you're sorry, eyes are starry. Don't you see, it's the elephant in the room. Is everybody blind? They don't mind, it'll all be over soon. Is everybody fine? They don't mind. I step out, all the passers-by begin to scream and shout, call for safety, he seems angry. What's this for? Is it just a dream or act of civil war? As it stated, I was hated, now related. Don't you see, it's the elephant in the room. Is everybody blind? They don't mind, it'll all be over soon. Is everybody fine? They don't mind. Don't you see, I'm the elephant in the room, and everyone is blind. I don't mind, I'll be sure to